Good afternoon. I'm Susan Johnson, Secretary of the University Staff Advisory Council. Welcome to the Fireside Chat with President Barron. Our goal for this event is to provide the university community an opportunity to hear the thoughts of our new leadership and what they envision for the future of Penn State. Please welcome President Eric Barron. Joining President Barron is Provost Nicholas Jones. We would also like to welcome our Vice President for Human Resources, Susan Basso. Thank you for participating in our conversation today. The University Staff Advisory Council would also like to thank you, the staff, for joining us today as well. Now let's begin with our questions. Our first question: what is your vision for Penn State, and what role do you see staff playing in that vision?
Okay, so I'm trying to avoid getting too carried away with the vision yet, because I think it's important to understand the institution that you're leading before you just go launch. So I tell a lot of people that I'm pretending to be chief sponge of the university and just learn just as much as I can. It's part of the reason why I visited all the Commonwealth campuses, and part of the reason why I'm sort of steadily meeting with each individual in the leadership and each dean, and now I've started on a course of having at least a half-hour conversation individually with each and every one of the Board of Trustee members to see what issues are on their mind. I'm trying to do it as quickly and deliberately as possible. Even with that being the case, I'm trying to frame my ability to understand and be a good sponge by picking 6 topics that I think are of importance and are part of the national conversation about higher education and the conversation about Penn State. So one of the things that, if I go through these, is just level of excellence. Best defense when times are tough. Best offense when times are good. If you're good, you will be successful. I mean, there's a reason why we have $850 million in external research funds and a record while the federal government is closing in on their budgets. It's because our faculty are incredibly competitive, and since we've got all this staff from the grants programs there, especially at liberal arts, we can say we also have a staff that's very effective in helping us deliver and get that done. So excellence becomes incredibly important. The second thing I put on my list is student engagement, and the reason is pretty clear based on a lot of data. If you have a student that is doing worthwhile activities outside of the classroom 10 to 20 hours a week, they tend not to get into trouble as much. They have to do time management. And so that's a little bit healthier for the student. But in addition to that, they tend to have a peer group that is also doing healthy things. And so their activities are reinforced. Well, so you're healthier and you're happier, and also if you look at students that are engaged and students that are not engaged, students that are engaged have higher grade points. So now I'm healthier, happier, and I have a better grade point. And by the way, if I'm doing worthwhile activities, then my resume is stronger. And if my resume is stronger, I get a better job. Okay, so how does a university resist the notion of promoting engagement? The third thing I put on my list is diversity and demographics. Moral imperative that we educate the students of our state and our nation, and increasingly the world. So you can look at that number 3 point there, no priority order. You can look at it that purely from that moral responsibility. You can also look at it from the viewpoint that a diverse environment is a richer environment for everybody. And you don't need a lot of data to even see that. Just talk to the students and they will tell you over and over again how much they valued international classmates, a roommate, people that come from different economic backgrounds, people of different race. Students will constantly tell you that this was transformative. But the third issue about this is one where the demographics in Pennsylvania are changing. And that may mean it's easier to get students from a region or harder to get students from a region. Then if you step back and look at all the babies born in the last year, you realize that 18 years from now, the students that are going to come to college, the distribution of that population looks very different than the distribution of population today. So from a purely business perspective, if you're not a welcoming and inclusive environment, I don't see how you succeed. All your campuses don't succeed, and a campus like this will struggle. So I put that diversity and demographics issue on my list. The fourth thing I put on my list is economic development and student career success. I like to couple them, and if I try to say it simply, one, we rank 17th among all universities in the U.S. in delivering research, in getting research grants and producing that research. But we're in the 70s in terms of getting our intellectual property out into the marketplace. Okay, now this is something where I think a lot of publics are having more trouble doing. There are challenges to doing this, and you're operating on a significant number of public dollars. And so people are looking at you and saying, wait a minute, you're using a tuition dollar to get that patent into the marketplace? And so even the thought process of a public is different. That's not the way a Stanford thinks about it, but it's definitely the way a public thinks about it. In my mind, that doesn't mean you stop. That means, okay, how do publics deliver their intellectual property to the marketplace? Because I think this is a way in which the Commonwealth looks at us and looks at us in a better light. And basically, they look at us and say, okay, you're educating our students. By the way, you're also a tremendous economic driver. And this is something I think is actually a potential strength of the Commonwealth system as well. Okay, so what can we do to become even more and more formidable at getting that intellectual property to the marketplace? And then I couple it with student career success, because if you do a really good job of economic development, then you're putting your students through a training in which you know is partly driven by economic development, which means your students are going to walk into jobs as they move out into the world, because you're driving the economy and training the students at the cutting edge that go off into that economy. But even that aside, student career success is a hot topic nationally. It's a hot topic nationally because we've got a lot of people out there coming out of the recession whose viewpoint was, wait a minute, you're not producing students for a job? So you're charging all that money and you don't know what will happen at the end of that? Shouldn't you only have students take majors that you know will have a job at the other end of it? A lot of the liberal arts institutions, small liberal arts institutions, are fighting back by showing that regardless of major, their students are going off and doing great things. And I suspect that's true. So what it means is the quality of the education becomes incredibly important. But I think there's a lot of things that you can do deliberately to promote student career success, including having their eyes wide open about what the job titles are of a major, what the salary ranges are, what the current unemployment rate is, even though that won't be true 4 years or 5 years later. How you can embed into the curriculum skills like critical thinking and communication that help make a student successful in whatever job they do, having a very strong career services function in a university, but you get kind of the idea there. The fifth thing I put on my list is accessibility. And you could read affordability, efficiency, and you know, there might be some people out there that aspire to provide the cheapest education that they can. And we need to aspire to delivering the best quality we can as efficiently as we can. And you know, I tell people this is a tightrope. We know that if a student graduates from the 8th ranked public in the nation that's a ticket to employment. It's a higher salary when you leave, and that salary keeps growing at a higher rate, okay? And so anything we do to reduce the quality of the institution, our students will pay for the rest of their lives. So it might be $2,000 cheaper a year, but they'll pay for that for the rest of their lives in terms of what, and you know, I try not to pick on any institution, so I make one up, okay? So you come from Southwestern, Middle Eastern Tennessee State University versus a private like a Harvard, a public like Penn State. How does an employer view that? There's no doubt in your mind that that reputation of quality for this institution has a big impact. So we don't want to shortchange any student on that quality of the degree. At the same time, we don't want every time we need to do something new or something happens for us to go, oh, okay, I'll just translate that to a higher tuition increase and I'll put that in the backs of students and families. And you don't want to look at it in terms of what can the consumer, the student, bear. You really want to constantly be looking at how we can be more efficient and more effective. And I don't think a lot of people in the nation think about this very deeply. They'll sit there and say, I really don't want you to increase tuition. But from my perspective is, you've got an enormous number of students that go 5 years and 6 years to get a degree. You want the biggest tuition increase in the world? Go an extra year. You're not in the job market, you're not making a salary, and instead you're paying the tuition and paying for the living and paying for the food service. So the worst tuition increase I can imagine is go a 5th year, go a 6th year. So these are the types of things that I'd like to think about in terms of access. And affordability and efficiency is not, let me cut this, but consciously, can we be more effective in delivering a great degree and not sacrifice quality, as a matter of fact, go the other way. The last thing I put on my list, you didn't know I could give such a long answer, did you?
I have more questions, too.
Yeah, well, so the last thing I put on my list is how we're going to handle technology. Because it's constantly changing, and then you have to redo it, and you pay a whole new price. You know, if you in your personal life, it would be the equivalent of buying an SUV every year and driving it off a cliff and say, "Oops, I need another one." And so this is very expensive, but you have to keep up. And you may notice, as well as everybody else, that that the range of capability of people that are coming in the door is growing. You know, here's some young woman who wants it all delivered on her mobile platform and wants an instant response at 2 o'clock in the morning. And here's another learner that's not touched computers. And this is such an enormous range, and it's constantly changing in every environment. So what's the best model for doing this? You could also move that into a whole discussion of online education. So those are my 6. And the last part of your question is staff involvement.
Yes.
And you know, I don't think I can think any of these that don't have a staff component that's sitting there. You know, if you looked at diversity and demographics, frequently you're the first people that a student sees. You're the person that has someone working on a grant or walking in the door. Your interactions throughout the university are definitely a window on the whole institution. So if you're welcoming and inclusive, then that sense of community and welcoming and being inclusive spreads throughout the whole university. You truly do become like family. And my sense is that Penn State does have that sense of family. And you know, I tell people that a lot of times diversity is somebody's assigned job, when in fact it has to be everybody's job to be thinking that way. Well, you know, that might be one example. I could pick another example in terms of student engagement. So I have 5 or 6 areas of student engagement that I think are particularly important. And I won't touch on all of them because then I could talk the entire time and you'd really wonder about whether you'd get your other questions answered. But pick one, internships. Incredibly valuable experience for students. Networking, real life experience, a ticket to a job. Who's going to own the internship process within the university as a part of engagement and make that successful? Well, I suspect it's the staff that are sitting there making sure that they have those and are communicating with students and enabling that particular part of the process. I just can't think of, you know, look at student career success and the value of services like a career center. This is a staff-driven process of enabling students to be successful. So I think the answer to your last part is I think I could repeat each one of these 6 areas that I'm trying to be a sponge about and touch on the significance of staff.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Over the last several years, the institution has been through heavy scrutiny and staff has been on the front lines, greeting visitors, answering phones, etc. You have made the decision to return to Penn State during this rough period, and we thank you for that. Do you have any thoughts on how to move forward from this point?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, I have to tell you that I have a rather different perspective having sat outside instead of inside. I mean, it's certainly a perspective of realizing how painful all of that was and how painful it was for alumni and for anybody who cares deeply about Penn State, which after spending 20 years here, I certainly was of that situation and character. But the rest of the world has moved on. And I think one of the things that surprised me the most was that there's kind of this little bubble over Pennsylvania and a little tighter bubble over State College on the importance of this topic, and it isn't anywhere else. And so I surprised myself because I thought, okay, I'm going to come into my interview. I better know what the news is for University Park and State College. And I looked, and I thought, oh my goodness, every single day here is another kind of story that's sitting there. None of that is outside this state. And a lot of it isn't even outside of this particular community. And so here's what the rest of the world sees. They see a university ranked number 8 among publics, its highest ever. They hear about record student interest in applications and enrollments that put a lot of pressure on residents' life and everybody else. And I'm trying, yes, okay, you know. All right, so, and you wish that was a science, you could predict exactly how many people are coming in. A record external funding coming out of a recession and very tight federal budgets. A capital campaign that is concluding at about $2.2 billion when people said between a recession and other things that happened, that's impossible. Okay, that's what the rest of the world sees. They see this Penn State power continuing to become even more powerful of an institution. So my feeling is, and especially now after being here for a little while, that what this is doing is creating fatigue. Not something where this is self-analysis of what we did wrong, because the institution is doing so many things to be a model in terms of compliance and ethics. It's just astounding what's being accomplished, and a lot of the other universities in the country see it. So from my viewpoint, the bubble's getting smaller, it's dissolving, and maybe it's just going to pop here. I think hopefully people begin to realize that the story is not interesting anymore, and it won't be just a matter of fatigue. It'll be a matter of this university is so far past it. So my hope for staff, who I know went through a lot, is that they see it's in the rearview mirror, but they're spending a lot more time looking at where they're going as opposed to what's in the rearview mirror.
Thank you. There is a feeling that part of the reason for the circumstances we found ourselves in is that people were afraid to speak up. A lot of effort has been put forward to change that. What are your thoughts and plans to encourage a culture where people feel safe to report wrongdoing?
Yeah, I wish I had the full answer there. Here's my view. I don't know of any institution where that's not true. Okay, so this may be where we need a few good faculty who understands institutional function to look at this particular issue. But and the other thing that I think you see over and over again, if you were to have a survey from many different institutions, and let's focus on the educational ones for a moment, I think you would discover that staff are more concerned about that issue than almost everybody else. Faculty members have a certain amount of security with tenure, and frankly, and it's many times brings a smile to my face, they feel like they could say anything at any time because they're, what their positions and feelings and about how they think about things. Whereas staff, undoubtedly, that sense of hierarchy and how power and influence changes with hierarchy, and what that means if in order to complain or say something, that has to go to a level in which it makes you feel insecure, or the unit is small enough that you can easily be identified, so it's not confidential. All those things bear into, I think, a culture in which some people are more hesitant to come forward than others. So, one, whatever you do, don't think that's a part of Penn State, okay? Just do not think that that's a part of Penn State. That's a part of institutional culture for which there's hierarchies of people with different levels of power. On the other side, what can you do? Well, I think certainly some of those things where we're reminding people that this is something that's important to do, and there are consequences for people if bad behavior doesn't get reported. Well, we see that's one. Having people to talk to, in my view, in my history, it's a strong ombuds effort where you can sit there and talk, and amazingly, a lot of times talking through things, you even realize that some things are misinterpretations, or might be, and some things are ones in which a conversation can solve them, and other things are ones where the individual says, no, I'm sorry, I need to help you take this to a different level because this is not acceptable. But having those avenues by which you feel like you can talk to somebody and have that level of confidentiality and trust, and to be able to be advised by people that have professional training, I think becomes important. And I think there are a lot of other avenues here that you might contemplate for this issue. I think it's an issue that comes in corporations just as much as it comes in institutions, but and unfortunately tends to be a bigger stress for staff than almost anybody else.
The university is currently involved in the implementation of a new student information system, and we will soon be implementing a new human resource system. As we move more deeply into these projects, we may identify business practices that will need to be modified. Can you speak of how we as a university community can embrace these changes that will be required?
the changes that will be required because we will realize that some things aren't perfect yet? Is that what you mean?
Or that they are not politically correct, or that there's been a change in the world that affects the changes that we've made.
Okay, so we've made a change and people are uncomfortable with it, and they're even a little concerned about how they might come forward and say, hey, this doesn't work very well.
Correct. And
when you've got a whole bunch of people that invested an enormous amount of time and money into doing it.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. So I'll make a couple of assumptions here. One is those are two really big changes. Mm-hmm. And with all really big changes, I think perfection is impossible. And so I think we'll start with a given that there will absolutely be cases that you've just described. Mm-hmm. So I'll start with one point, and it may not be that helpful, and that's communicate, and when you think you've over-communicated, communicate one more time. And part of that communication better be why you're doing some of the things that you've done. Mm-hmm. Because I find over and over again that you may have a really good reason, and even though someone objects and it becomes more difficult, there's another reason behind the curtain that has driven that particular change, and yet I haven't communicated that very well to anyone, and so sometimes that understanding of the why helps change what that conversation is. And otherwise, I think, the people that are higher up and that are in charge of these different components, and I know you're one of them, are just going to have to be stuck with the notion that they should be open and listen to those comments and be able to have good reasons if they have to say, no, here's the reason. I may not have communicated that well, but here's the reason why this becomes something that's important to do. It is also an incredibly difficult thing to do. I devised, just as an example, I devised a short, quick, 30-question assessment of deans and department heads. And, everything from office function to vision, and the idea is to get a quick response, a lot of people to respond, and to be able to look longitudinally through time at how a leader was evolving. And I always ask communication questions, and I will tell you, in now a decade of doing that survey, communication scores are always the lowest of all scores on all questions. It's never good enough. And, I tell people, oh yeah, I'm a good communicator. I don't like to read my speaking in print directly because it sounds like I'm illiterate sometimes, but because I sort of talk and go, and my facial expression is sitting there interacting. I think you understand what I'm talking about, but it didn't make a complete sentence sometimes. But, I think that I'm good at that, but I know my scores would be the same. And you just have to overdo it and consciously sit there and say, well, will anybody understand the reason why we're doing it this way? But then we're just going to have to be open to people, even when it makes us a little uncomfortable, to saying, gee, this part doesn't work. So hopefully I will help, and Nick will help, and Susan will help. And
okay, thank you. We're almost done. As modifications continue with our health care, and in light of the Affordable Care Act, what issues still need to be addressed by the university, and what impacts, if any, do you foresee?
Okay, so what impacts still have to be addressed? Well, my opinion is every year it's going to change. And if I look at the projections of how healthcare costs may change, even 3 or 4 years, you literally can look at those budgets in terms of 3% tuition increases for every student to cover a couple of years' projections in the increase in healthcare costs. I mean, this is astounding. Everybody looks at us and says, look at what you've got. How can you think about a 3% tuition increase and putting that on the backs of families? And you're looking at that cost, and half of that tuition increase is just to hold our own. There's no way that's sustainable. And so we're going to have to constantly be looking for how we get the best possible benefits and service, and very consciously save that money, because that's just too difficult. And then if you take the next step and you look at how the law is changing and the penalties that occur for so-called Cadillac programs, and the notion that that a certain portion of the care must be paid for by the individual and can't be paid for by the institution, and you look at the penalties for failing to do that, I mean, those penalties are, for an institution like this, are in tens of millions of dollars. And I think a 3% tuition increase generates about $30 or $36 million. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's an incredible issue. And I don't think we're done yet. I don't think that law just hit there and we're going to hit these boundaries. We're going to be constantly evolving through this. And you're watching the insurance companies all evolve in different ways, which is not necessarily predictable. So my feeling is probably, and I'm going to announce this, that we're going to need a group that's going to look at healthcare that's going to be ongoing. And that ongoing group is going to have to look at it operationally, not just a task force that looks at healthcare options, but a group that operationally, step by step, looks at here's what's happened with how the insurance companies are treating medical providers, here's the change in costs, here's this policy and that policy, here's the data set on this, and we're going to have to every year be looking at this, because I do not, if you start to sit there and say every tuition increase is just going to be to keep benefits exactly the way they are without us trying to maneuver through this landscape, that we're not going to be able to sell that to anybody. So, a really complicated issue. And I think presidents really had it easy about a decade ago. They didn't have issues like this. Budgets were growing. You had money to spend. You could do new things. And now it's what can you cut? And can you manage healthcare? And could I just write my own headline in the newspaper for a change, as opposed to somebody else? So, anyway.
That's why I started with welcome back.
Yeah. But it's true everywhere. It's true everywhere.
So, President Barron, from your experience, can you please speak of staff involvement in your previous university activities and endeavors, and what you hope to see them looking like at Penn State, including your envision on utilizing the University Staff Advisory Council?
Yeah, okay, so I would say that I'm thrilled that there's a Staff Advisory Council. And I don't remember ever seeing it any other place that I've been, which is kind of interesting. If you go back to when, I was a dean here, I had a kind of college council, and the whole idea was to get the president of the graduate student body, the undergraduate student body in the college, staff representation, staff leadership, faculty leader, myself, this group in a room together, and just talk about what was going on in the college, and tell these individuals that part of their job was for people to recognize them as an additional conduit for information, more communication, but also for people to recognize that if they had issues, they could bring it up and we could sit there and talk about it. You know, there were a lot of wonderful outcomes where a problem would be presented and somebody else would say, well, I know how to solve that. And so that part was good. Well, that's not a staff council. That's just sort of a representative discussion. Texas was an institution where it was every college for themselves. and kind of an interesting model where everybody was aggressive at getting the piece of pie that they could, and this notion of a more universal staff council that did not exist. And incidentally, that EMS council was of my own device. I created it because I was worried about how I was just looking for one more mechanism to promote communication and have ideas that were bubbling forward. Florida State, every group was represented by a union, and this was not a partnership. And I'm not faulting the union at all. I had a lot of great interactions with the union. I always felt like we made progress on the issues, but you didn't think about it as being a partnership. You thought about it as being a negotiation. Those two words are very different. And so my view is here there's so much more potential to have it be a partnership and to be able to discuss things and talk to people and get feedback. And so truthfully, I'm looking forward to this as my best staff experience to date. So we'll see how that works.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I only have one more question.
Yeah.
Do you have any last comments that you or Provost Jones that you would like to make?
Oh, okay, so I'll give it a whirl, and then I'm really excited about being back, and I don't know whether you've heard me say this before, but I loved my last job. I loved where the university was going. I saw it emerging from a very difficult budget situation and coming out stronger than ever, and capital campaign rolling along. And 2 times, once about a year ago and once about 6 months ago, when the search firm called me, I said, no, I'm happy. And Rod Erickson called me up on the phone in end of January and said, Eric, I know you have good reasons why you would want to stay at Florida State, which was incidentally my alma mater. But will you do me just one small favor? And I said, Rod, he was my boss for quite a while. And I said, Rod, for you, I will. And he said, meet with my board chair, just have a conversation with him. And the simple fact of the matter is I think I avoided all year long even talking to anybody, because I knew that if I turned my head towards Penn State that I wouldn't be able to resist coming here. It's a place that has an incredible spirit and attitude, and it's one of always trying to do more and to do it better. And it's quite interesting to me that in the capital campaign, in the closing of the capital campaign, and the whole idea is with all this fanfare and to put this enormous number up there and the success that it is, they had people talking, and one of the people that was speaking was a student who stood up there and said, what his experience has been. He said, every morning I get up and I think about what can I do more and what can I do better. And I was sitting far in the audience and I went, my goodness, that's Penn State. That's the way in the 20 years that I was here, that's the way I always felt about Penn State. And I thought, okay, it was scripted. It was scripted. So I said something to Peter Tombros, who was the campaign chair. I said, I almost don't want to ask, I almost don't want to know, but the student said this, was that scripted? And a day later, he wrote back to me and he said, something, I went and checked it. He said what he felt like saying. And so, this is a place to be incredibly proud of. And I know that's a long-winded way to say I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really looking forward to working with everybody. And incidentally, I will make mistakes. I'm just hoping there are not too many and they're not too big. But I'm incredibly human. Hopefully I will do everything with, you know, a strong heart, and it'll come from that, and hopefully a little brain power. But I won't be perfect, but I'll do the best I can to make everybody continue to be proud. So.
Ditto. Well, let me just say a couple of things, and actually much of what President Barron said in response to the questions you asked, I would very strongly echo. But I just put a couple of spins on for me personally. It was one Sunday afternoon. Now about 15 months ago, I drove up 322 from Baltimore. I too had a job at Johns Hopkins University that I really loved, but somehow this little seed got planted with me that there was an opportunity at Penn State in the provost role. So I was sort of somewhat reluctant to consider it because I liked very much what I was doing. But eventually I just decided that I'd investigate. And the investigation began with an airport interview in Pittsburgh, and then I was invited up for a campus visit. So I drove in 322. I drove here because I stayed in this building. And I met Rod Erickson for dinner that evening. That was my first meeting. So my first contact really here was with Rod. I remember being very nervous. I remember standing in the bathroom before I went down for dinner, and I took a picture of my outfit and sent it to my partner just to check that everything matched the way it was supposed to. I think she very kindly said it did, but I'm not sure that it did. Anyway, but there began for me really two incredibly grueling days of conversations with people here on this campus. And as I went from one intense and grueling conversation to the next, I just became more and more engaged with and excited about the prospect of coming to this institution. And by the time I left, I remember I stopped for gas on that at the Sheet Station on South Atherton before driving back to Baltimore. I remember as the gas was going, and I was sort of looking back in the direction of campus, just going, wow, that was an incredible experience. And this place just had a profound impact on me. And as I got back to Baltimore, I was just, my fingers were crossed that I would get a call from Rod at some point in the future. Well, a thumbs up call from Rod at some point. I knew I was going to get a call. I just hoped it was the right one. But the passion, the intensity, the potential that I felt here with everybody I met with during that 2-day period was really just amazing. And so I did get the call from Rod, and it was pretty. I think Rod's email said to me, "Is there a time we could talk? I'd like to discuss with you how we might get you to join us at Penn State." And I can remember thinking, actually, you don't have to do anything. I'll come. But it was really, really exciting. And since I've been here 11 months almost now, I must say that the actual experiences far exceeded the anticipation. I think this is an extraordinary institution with unbelievable potential, and I'm really feel privileged and honored to be here at this time in Penn State's history to help advance the institution. I too will make plenty of mistakes as I do that. Second thing I'll say is, I guess last week Eric and I had the opportunity to speak at the retirees luncheon. That too was a pretty moving event. As I looked out on the room and just saw the collective longevity that was being expressed there, just a lot of people who'd worked a lot of years at this institution, all with their coming to work every day, rolling up sleeves and doing what they needed to do to move the institution forward. Eric touched on this a few moments ago, and I just want to pick up on it. For the staff, I think the staff are really a very special group at this institution. You know, the students are very visible. At the end of the day, we're here really to serve the students, and we have a lot of them to serve, and our students get accolades, academic accolades. They become our alumni. They have successes in athletics. Faculty do a great job teaching. They do terrific research, make great discoveries in their laboratories. So there's a certain visibility associated with the students and the faculty. The staff tend to be less visible externally, at least. And I think that sometimes that can make the job of a typical staff member just a little bit tough. You wonder if your efforts are recognized, if your efforts are acknowledged. In some instances, you probably wonder if your efforts are even seen. And you know, I can tell you with great confidence that they are. You all make an incredible contribution to this institution every day, and often a lot of it is off the radar screen. It is often invisible. The effects are not invisible, but what you're doing you may feel as invisible, and I want to assure you that it's not. It's not to us. We really know what an important contribution you make to this institution. If you reached in here and pulled out the staff, we would grind to a halt immediately, and there's absolutely no question about that in my mind. So I just want to tell you, certainly from my perspective, that I like Eric, think that this group is a really important resource to us, because us being able to connect to the staff directly through you all is important. And you do an incredibly important job for us, even though a lot of that work is maybe a little bit below the radar screen. We know it, we know what you're doing, and it is appreciated, and your voice and your contribution to Penn State are incredibly important. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and accompany Eric.
Thank you. This concludes our program. We'd like to thank both President Barron and Provost Jones for being with us today. We greatly appreciate it. And we'd like to thank you, the staff, for joining us today as well. So have a great weekend.